My name's Becky Amato. I'm the Director of Teaching and Learning at Illinois Humanities. Illinois Humanities is co-sponsoring this event this evening with LaSalle Public Library and Oglesby Public Library. So we want to thank everybody for their hospitality and for joining us tonight. And I'm so glad you all made it through the snow and the ice and the fog for this program. And for those of you who are watching online, I hope you're very comfortable and warm wherever you are. We are comfortable in this room. Illinois Humanities provides free, high-quality humanities experiences throughout Illinois, particularly for communities of color, individuals living on low incomes, counties and towns in rural areas, small arts and cultural organizations, and communities highly impacted by mass incarceration. We work to make the public humanities central to a just, creative, and connected Illinois. And we're committed to being partner-centered and working with libraries like this one, honoring our complex histories and cultures and making space for difficult and crucial conversations that promote equity. And I think some of the conversations we'll have this evening fit that description. If you're interested in joining Illinois Humanities and learning more about us, you can go follow us on Instagram at ilhumanities, or on Facebook, and we also have a newsletter. So this program is part of the National Endowment for the Arts Big Read, which is sponsored by the NEA and Arts Midwest. And our theme this year is Reconsidering the American Dream. So we want to thank the NEA and Arts Midwest and the NEH and the Institute for Museum and Library Services for funding this series. 19 book groups across the state of Illinois are currently reading books together, which is really exciting. They're reading 2 books. So many of them are finishing reading a book called Heartland right now, and you can see a copy of it over there. Thank you, Rachel, for setting up the books. If you would like a copy, I can get one to you. You might be able to take that copy. You can also join a book group. There's a book group in Princeton, Illinois right now, which is really close. The Princeton Public Library, also Walnut Public Library, and also Oglesby Public Library. The first book was Heartland. The second book is called Infinite Country, and it's by Patricia Engel. And most of the book groups are going to be reading that next month. They are books that prompt us to ask, what does a 21st century American dream look like? And who has access to it? A big question we'll talk about this evening. What do we need to do to broaden access both individually and in community? And maybe how can we look to one another as partners rather than competitors as we strive for an American dream that we can all believe in? So tonight's program is going to be part of those kinds of conversations. First, we'll watch the 2012 Frontline documentary Poor Kids, which was produced by Jeza Neumann and Lauren Mucholo. And for those of you who are watching this event live and streaming, you can do one of 2 things. You can keep watching here and maybe get a kind of not so great view of the film, or you can go to the link that we have in the notes below on YouTube, and that's the link to the Frontline documentary online. So you can watch that in crystal clear vision on your own computer or however else you're watching it. Then come back here to our streaming at 7 p.m. where we'll have a conversation that refers to the film and really refers to the issues that the film covers in this region. So that's that. I'm going to turn it over to whoever is starting the film, and we're going to begin that. Like I said, please come back at 7 p.m. for the conversation with Chris and Vanessa. I'll also introduce them. And before we start the film, I just want to thank Rachel Blomquist, Donna Blomquist, Lynn Sheedy, Bruce Baldwin, and our speakers, and the staff of Illinois Humanities for bringing us this program. Welcome back. I think it's 7 p.m. And as promised, we have a conversation with 2 wonderful people. Actually, I've really enjoyed meeting both of you and experts on some of the topics that we just covered in the film. I'd like to introduce you to Christopher Merritt, Dean of Innovation and Economic Development and Director of the Illinois Institute for Rural Affairs, over here. Chris currently serves as the Dean for Innovation and Economic Development, as I mentioned, at Western Illinois University. The Illinois Institute for Rural Affairs is a university-based research, outreach, teaching, and policy development center that identifies and implements strategies for sustainable rural community and economic development. Chris has authored or collaborated on more than 100 publications in the area of rural community and economic development. And here we have Vanessa Hoffeditz, Community Services Food Pantry Manager at Tri-County Opportunities Council. Vanessa has worked as a community service manager for Tri-County Opportunities Council for 13 years. Tri-County is a community action agency whose mission is to investigate the impact of poverty in their 9-county area. Does that include LaSalle?
Yes.
Yes, and that includes LaSalle. And they work in partnership with individuals, families, and communities to provide opportunities that support movement towards stability and self-sufficiency. In her role, she provides support and direction to outreach staff who work directly with low-income households. She's also responsible for running the agency's food pantry, which serves Bureau County. And we already have had wonderful conversations, so I'm really excited about what's about to follow. I'll leave the conversation to the two of you. Thank you.
I guess I could start by saying everything we saw on the front line production tonight resonates with me in the sense that the work I do at the Illinois Institute for Rural Affairs is focused on community well-being, including issues of poverty, issues of job opportunity, and the struggles that people confront on a daily and weekly basis. And I thought they did a lovely job of portraying those. And to be honest, I was kind of impressed with how mature the children. I sort of think, as they were trapped, as were in that position, they just seemed very sort of self-aware, and for that I enjoyed the production.
Well, for me, the work we do every day, we encounter families and children who are in these exact same situations. So it just reinforced the work that we're doing to try and help families become stabilized and move out of poverty. So it was emotionally challenging for me.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen this 3 times, and it's very emotionally challenging for me because some of what those families were experiencing were things that I've encountered personally with other families in our area, including here in LaSalle.
I thought the show really personalized what can be kind of abstract ideas. So I was sort of thinking, the digital divide. I mean, we saw the family was about to lose their internet access, right? And one could have also imagined this, cell phone service. And so that looks it's kind of a fancy term that you would think about in a policy brief, but I thought the show did a great job of actually showing the consequences of that kind of policy thing, if you will. And then, the idea of trauma was, and I think you confront that more on a day-to-day basis than I do. I'm sort of a pointy-headed academic, and I do research and these sorts of things, and we do outreach. But I think you're in the front lines of this, where you see distraught families and their children. And I also thought the show did a very nice job of, a poignant job, if you will, of portraying those things.
And what I think the film showed, and I'm very glad that the group here tonight got to see the extended version with the 2017 update, because I had seen it originally from 2012. So showing how the children were still impacted. I don't know if the rest of you in the audience felt that way or recognized that. The young lady who had the dog and lost the dog, and how traumatic that was for her, because she wanted so badly to have that collar, right? Just as a memento of losing that dog. And then fast forward to 5 years later, and here she is having that dog and talking about how that dog provides her with therapy and support. And you can see that in every story with the children, how what they went through, what they emotionally experienced, still sticks with them. And a lot of the work that we're doing with households involves trying to help those families face that trauma that they've experienced, and then try to get the support they need and move into life in a successful way. I think that's one of the areas that impacts me every day, is knowing that children in our area, in LaSalle County even, are experiencing those senses of trauma, whether that be not knowing if they're going to have a roof over their head, where are they going to have food, that all of that doesn't go away. It sticks with them into adulthood.
You know, there was a sort of a theme that went through that the children had a sense of stigma, and do you see that in people reluctant to ask for help? I mean, I'm sort of thinking of in almost every family, I guess every family in some way shared that they were reluctant to ask for help, they were embarrassed. That's sort of maybe an underappreciated element of poverty, I suspect.
And I think the fact that a lot of people may have the perception that people don't try hard enough to get out of that situation. And I think it was mentioned even in that video with the children and the adults. They're working hard, they're trying. We see a lot of families who've tried to do it on their own first, and by the time they come to see us to get the assistance, they're so overwhelmed, they don't know how to get out of it. I think of the families who lost their housing. Our agency and other agencies like us do have funding to help support people with rent. But then when they come to us, because they've been trying so hard, which is admirable, because of that fear and that stigma of seeking help, there are thousands of dollars in the hole beyond what even we can help them with. So, you know, the children especially, you know, being bullied, being treated differently, carrying that with them, realizing that poverty exists, that there are neighbors that we have next to us, there are children that go to school with our children who are barely making ends meet. And I think sometimes if we think about how can we help remove that stigma so more families are willing to come and seek assistance before it gets to be too difficult.
And as you were chatting there and talking about stigma, it got me thinking about the stereotypes that we might have about low-income families. And as you mentioned, very hardworking. The one single mom, she was working third shift, 40 and 50 hours a week. And then Roger, the young man, he graduated high school early, right? And then the young lady, she was very creative. And so it was apparent to me, at least from this show, that low-income households, there are people who have skills, there's people, they're working hard, but there must be some barriers, or there's some sort of speed bumps on their path to success. And so I guess, you know, part of what I'm trying to do, and I suspect legislators and you working on the front lines, we're trying to figure out how do we not only address the short-term issues of keeping them housed and fed, but then help launch them into a better life, which they're working hard.
And there's not any one solution, right? As you know in your work as well. I think in rural America, it becomes a little bit more difficult because the areas that we serve don't have a level of other resources that maybe larger urban areas do have. If we think about in our own area, in recent years, the numbers of larger employers that have left our areas, laid off folks when they're working, trying to link people to those resources, as you said, so as they're working harder, how can they overcome those situations? And I think the movie just really portrayed the fact that it's not any one thing that gets in the way. It's a multitude of things. And so I think it goes back to what we're trying to do here tonight, is to get people to have an awareness that poverty does exist in our communities. And then how do we work together as communities to work on those barriers for every citizen in our community. I mean, the work you're doing.
You know, some of the work we're doing, well, yeah, thank you. And, some of the issues we're trying to deal with is sort of food deserts and trying to figure out in- I know that one of the families was in the Quad Cities, and so there would at least be grocery stores. And in some of the rural areas that we work with, they haven't had a grocery store for 5 or 10 years, and so we're trying to start up rural grocery store cooperatives as a way of making food, reasonably priced, healthy food, more accessible rather than relying on a corner store or a convenience store to find where your food might be coming from. And that kind of got me thinking about actually a quote from the Heartland book, which is accompanying, like on page 129, the author says, "Poverty is not only shamed, but monetized to benefit the rich," which I found was a pretty powerful statement. But from our Frontline show, I was noticing that when the single mom was kicked out of her house and then moved into the hotel, I think it was $39.95 a night per person. But if you kind of do the math, you sort of, cost that out for 30 days. I mean, that's probably way more than she was spending on the house. And so I think in some ways I've heard this phrase used other ways, that it's expensive to be poor.
Yes. And when you're desperate, you're not thinking through that math you just did, right?
Right.
We encounter that all the time. We see people who are living in hotels,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll tell us, but it's really cheaper for me because I'm not paying utilities, I'm not paying this, but the cost is actually higher in that particular case. But out of desperation, and maybe that goes back to your quote about monetization, out of desperation, they're making choices that are actually creating more difficulties than if they had given a moment of thought to that. Organizations like ours and other groups in communities, that's what our role is. Our role is to try and sit down with a family who's facing so many crises they can't, you can't see the forest through the trees, right? You can't see that there's any hope. You can't see that there's anyone to help. And so our role is to try to sit down and kind of, I'm not emotionally connected to that situation, but I can sit across from someone and have empathy and help them to work through other options. Maybe the hotel's not your only option. Maybe there are other ways that we can help you that will be more cost effective, that will help you get into a place of your own in a quicker manner, because if all your money's going toward a hotel, you're never going to have money for rent and deposit. You're just not, you're going to be stuck in that hotel.
So we talked about trauma, and despair was kind of a sense I've had, and there's a couple of phrases that I've thought about that relates to both the urban and rural setting that we saw. And one is the idea of a psychology of decline, where people have a household or even a community might have a sense of the inevitability of that things are only going to get worse and that they're not empowered to change things. And then the related idea of deaths of despair. We didn't see that too much in our Frontline show, but in the book they do talk about people turning to opioids and alcohol and other ways of sort of escape, if you will, and then that consequently leads to early deaths or chronic illness and these sorts of things. So I'm not sure how we turn that around when you have entire communities that are feeling bereft of hope. I'm not sure. Do you have a sense of that happening in some of your communities?
Absolutely. The statement that struck me in that film was when the kids were saying life is hard, right? I think about myself growing up. I don't ever remember thinking to the same degree that life is hard. And the child who had the notebook with all the bills, they knew more about what money their parents had than I can remember having an awareness of when I grew up, right? I couldn't sit down and say, oh, my mom gets this much and we only have this much. And that concept of despair and thinking at that young age that life is hard. The thing that gave me hope, though, was on the updates, you still had children who were trying to find a way to hang on to their dreams, however slim that is, right? So I think, to your point of communities in decline, it's also about where do we come together as communities and find hope in what we have in an area, whether that's economic development, whether that's people coming together to say this is a common issue that we have in our area, how can we rally around that so that we can have hope and be part of the solution, because we have to turn our eyes in a different way. The children are trying to do that, and I can't imagine how hard that is. I don't want to be like my mom. I'm going to have a house someday. I want to have my own room. So in some way we can learn from the children in this video and that follow-up that even though life is hard and there is a decline, where can we see hope? To your point of grocery stores and communities and food deserts, a small thing like that gives community hope, right? So all it takes is one thing that can trend an entire community in a direction just like it can trend those children in a positive direction too.
I don't know if there's any comment from folks in the audience or any thoughts, because I can keep on talking about stuff. I found great value in both the Frontline documentary and in the related book. There's just a lot of powerful things stated there.
I was struck by the line. I'm not sure if it was Kaylee or Brittany, it was one of the girls who said, you know, there's so many bad things have happened that I just don't care.
Exactly, yep.
You know, and that sense of despair that, you know, you don't care what happens. It's almost like, why try?
Right.
Why help myself? Why, you know, so the resilience though, that, you know, you hear it on the other side of that, you know, I'll go to college and hope life becomes better. But that statement was just like, wow.
And that goes back to the idea of the trauma that we see. You know, the situations we might encounter and have some extreme emotional response to that, and we sit across from people who don't have that. They have the same response that she had. They don't have an emotional response to it. And that is really hard to realize that someone's in that state. And that is hard for them to, you know, go to that other side. That is very tough.
Going back to I guess it's the subtitle of the Frontline, Revisiting the American Dream, I think that's a paraphrase, right? And so, you know, when I think about, you know, what does it mean to live the American dream, I think it means individualism, and that hard work is going to allow you to thrive. You'll be successful. All it takes is hard work on your own behalf, and that you are ultimately responsible for your own success. And I guess the message from Frontline documentary was that these young people were sort of treading water. They were, as hard as they were working, even the little children collecting recyclables and mowing lawns for the neighbors, they had a work ethic, which was pretty remarkable, to be honest. And yet I don't think simply them working harder and harder and harder is going to allow them to be living a comfortable middle-class lifestyle. I suspect that some other things have to happen in order, and something at the community level, something at the state level, something at the federal level. And I know that this coming summer, I think there was a federal policy for supplemental food, and I know that 15 states rejected that federal funding. They had to sign on, I think, by the first week of January, and it just makes me wonder why 15 of the 50 states would say that it's not of value to provide supplemental food for children when they can't get their regular lunchtime food at school. I mean, there was a systematic approach to sort of help lift people up, and some states opted not to do that. So it's a head scratcher for me.
Well, and I think as we think about the hard work and lifting yourself up, and the kids that were working hard and were still struggling, and the families that were in that position, what I think, and from my own experience sitting across from people, is it takes that community, right? It takes a community that has an awareness, number one, that poverty exists, before I started doing the work I did, I worked in the field of disabilities for a lot of years. My knowledge and awareness related to low-income situations and poverty was very limited. And so for me, having that awareness first to go, yes, this does exist. There are children that are hungry in LaSalle County. There are individuals living in poverty. There are households that are struggling to make ends meet. So number one, I have that awareness. And then number two, how do I become more willing to go within my community and find out what is happening? What are people doing to try and address homelessness? What is going on in our community related to feeding hungry people? What is going on at a legislative level in our state and at a local level with our leaders? And then how do I become engaged and involved in that issue? Because it's going to take all of us to work together to help every one of us. I mean, I don't think it's limited anymore. I think it's great. It's gotten worse. Go ahead, Dan.
I just want to ask your impressions about this when we talk about revisiting the American dream. This idea of, you know, that it takes a community to do this. Does the community want to do this because it's the morally right thing to do? Or does the community need to recognize, and I think that the community needs to recognize, that we might want to look at this as a matter of preservation of our culture and our society.
Absolutely.
Because there's this lack of hope, this hopelessness, and this lack of, this idea of talking about revisiting the American dream. There are such a huge segment of the population now that looks at this system and goes, this system doesn't work for me.
That's right.
This doesn't work for me. And they may want to change this system that we've all grown so. And, the idea that, these statements that we're not going to expand Medicaid in this state, we're not going to take school lunch, those are political statements. Those are political acts. And, so we got to get over this idea and start looking collectively at the idea, and this is a personal opinion, looking at this idea that collectively, we have to make this culture, this society work for all of us.
Absolutely.
And some of this I've actually, in my own sort of talking with people, I've actually pitched many of these ideas as actually being good capitalism. So the idea that we would provide affordable, dependable child care. There's at least a couple of instances in our frontline video tonight where if somebody had affordable, dependable child care, their life would have been a little bit easier, right? There may have been a two-income family rather than a one-income family, or there just would have been, I think, one less thing that a parent, whether it's the two-parent household or the single-parent household, having that kind of dependable, reliable infrastructure it makes a lot of sense from the household income side of things. It's also a workforce development thing, right? There's all kinds of businesses around there, have the help wanted sign out there, and it seems like this is sort of a win-win situation if you could have this kind of stability, especially with a single mom.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions from our YouTube viewers
Uh-oh.
who've been watching, thanks to Bruce's stream. So this is from Zerlene Thompson. How do you let the community know of the resources you have available?
Well, in the work that we do, we're not-for-profits, so advertising monies are limited. So we work with our outreach staff in our community to share those resources. I brought some agency resource guides tonight. I don't know if one can be posted online for folks to know specifically related to our organization what we have available for families. So I love that question. The second thing that we try and do in our work is go out within our community and find out what other people are doing that we need to find out about so we can link families to other resources besides us. So we do a lot of work with partners in our community to make them aware of our resources and then also to become aware of their resources so that we're doing a better job to identifying those barriers that Chris is talking about and working to reduce or find ways for folks to get over those barriers.
There's lots of really great agencies, public health departments work to spread that kind of news. But it is hard. I mean, it's a great question because many of these social service providers don't have a marketing budget, right? I mean, they would rather spend what money they have on delivering a service, so they're kind of torn. But another example of something that exists, but many people might not know about, is sort of demand response transportation. So we had the young dad, his brakes were broken, the car was not drivable, and he had to get to work. And so there, in many rural places and urban, to be honest, this also exists, but the idea of demand response transportation. Many rural communities get federal funding to help various nonprofit organizations in a community allow their vans or buses to be used when their primary clientele isn't using that. So there are strategies out there to try to keep people connected, whether it's getting to their doctor's appointment or getting to their job, but we need to be doing a better job of advertising those good services. Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, speaking even from an urban context from Chicago, we also have a difficult time reaching people and letting them know what the resources are. And so one of the things that I think has been really helpful is reaching out to people through schools, public schools, and through libraries,
Yes.
because those are always kind of community centers that
Yes.
somebody is connected to.
Yes.
Yep, absolutely.
Another question, sort of a follow-up. What programs or resources have you found to be most effective, especially in rural communities and especially in helping children feel more stable?
Well, this is sort of a good news, bad news thing. So we saw that the internet is increasingly, and we know for sure since COVID that having affordable, dependable access to the internet is really important for young kids. Not just gaming, but of course on snow days, and simply, that's where education is going. And there was a federal program called the American Connectivity Program. I think ACP is the acronym. And I think the policy was, it was like a $30 per month rebate for your internet subscription, but unfortunately, I think February of this year is the last.
Oh, wow.
So there was an attempt, but now it's coming to an end. But addressing some of the infrastructural issues that were talked about in the video, access to affordable broadband. Thank goodness for library, because often libraries are one of the reliable community center where access to the internet can happen for free.
And I think from another perspective, thinking about helping children feel more stable, we know there are increased mental health needs in our communities that are very unmet. And if you watch the children in this video, there were instances over and over and over again where you could identify the stress or the anxiety that you saw in those children, and even 5 years later. So one of the things that I would encourage people to do is to research in your local communities. There are, especially here in LaSalle County, there are several organizations that are working to increase mental health resources that are affordable to families, and trying to help children gain coping skills, so that they can work through some of that, deal with some of that trauma that they've encountered in their life, the stress and anxiety that they're experiencing. So definitely, I know in our particular area, there are some entities that are working really, really hard, not only to deal with mental health situations, but the substance use, which Chris alluded to, which was the alcohol and opioid use as well. And then For us, we work with households one-on-one. So a lot of organizations and partners are trying to identify those unique circumstances for that family unit so that we can then work with them to try and find other resources or develop some specific plans to stabilize that household and help them to move forward. Our organization works a lot with households that are homeless, and so we have grant funding. Chris was alluding to infrastructures and programs. We have a lot of grant funding that gets people off the street and into housing short term. One of the bigger barriers that we encounter in all of our 9 counties is affordable housing. We didn't really talk about that, but in the video, all of those families were experiencing uncertainty in housing, and you saw what happened to the children. Think of the statement where, oh, my dad doesn't have a good work day, his check is less, and I don't know if we can pay the bills. And what was the first thing they went to? I don't know if we can stay here. So finding affordable housing is critical, I think, to helping children specifically become more stabilized. So as communities, that is one area we really have to work on. How our communities, and there's a lot of interesting projects out there in some communities. I think Dixon and some areas up north are looking at how they take older structures that were something else and then converting them into housing that's affordable for folks. So I think communities kind of, again, have to kind of step up and say, is this worth our investment in our community? Because affordable housing is not just an issue for people in poverty, it's an issue for all of us. I mean, if I provided some information about fair market rent here in LaSalle County, and just if I could share that, for a 3-bedroom, the fair market rent in 2022 was $1,155 a month. That's in this county, right? So when you think about a 4-bedroom, think about some of those larger families we saw, it was $1,242 a month. And what we talk about with families, in order for it to be affordable moving forward, the rent can be no more than 50% of their income. So you'd almost have to be making $2,500 a month net to be able to afford housing. So if we look at that as an issue, that's an issue for our entire community. Housing is not affordable for anyone. And so I think it kind of goes back to what's most impactful in people's lives, and organizations like Chris and others who are doing research to try and say, what is happening? And then how do we come up with some solutions that are common to every citizen? I mean, I think once you find that commonality, you can get people invested in trying to make a difference.
And, there's one of the prompts that Becca had asked us about was, what kind of policy proposals are out there now, or what kinds of things would we like to see at a more programmatic level. And I know there's a lot of debate every year about the earned income tax credit, but that's a way that many households make their income go much further than one might expect. Now I'm going to show my age, I suspect, but when I went to high school, we had just extensive shop classes where we learned carpentry, we learned about electricity, we learned about plumbing, and they each year, or each couple of years, they took on a project of actually building a small house. And so that if you were taking shops like this, you were learning some really great skills. And it just made me wonder, my sense is that for many of our high schools that we've probably disinvested in that kind of training. And it just made me wonder of the families we saw, to what extent would they have been better prepared to secure a job, even if they didn't want to go on to college, but they would have maybe had some good technical skills, and technical in the sense of carpentry and plumbing, that would have made their job search a little bit easier. This would have,
Absolutely.
that's my hypothesis, at least a little bit. But and then, of course, in full disclosure, I work for a university. So, you know, making whether it's community college or university more affordable, that was a specific point mentioned, that the young kids, they recognized in themselves that they had potential, which is also something that this Heartland book, somebody in a rural area growing up in poverty recognized within themselves, you know, I could probably make something of myself, but maybe I need access to community college or university, and it shouldn't require you taking on $150,000 worth of debt, I don't think.
And I think at different periods of time, and correct me if I'm wrong, politically, people have stated, we need to invest in our community colleges, but it doesn't seem to translate into that
Right.
investment. It's often word speak versus true investment.
Right.
Some of the work that we do involves helping people to earn a short-term certification so that they can gain a skill in a very short period of time, but that is done through the local community college here. IVCC has some of those short-term certifications that can move people into earning more. One of the main ones we find that we pay for is the CDL program.
Right.
That's only available because we have a community college here that offers that, and that doesn't have the same price tag as a four-year school. It's
Right.
still beyond some means, but you can get someone to get a CDL, then they can start making better income, and they can be lifted out of poverty because they took 6 weeks, they got that CDL, and now their life is changing because of that opportunity. So I really concur with you that community colleges are great assets to our community to be able to help people in those cases.
It turns out there's actually an argument you could make that it's actually, again, you know, trying to be, you know, maybe both progressive but also understanding conservative values about, you know, free market. One could make the argument, and people have made the argument, that by making community college and university more affordable, that is to say, young people taking on less debt, that allows them then to get on with their lives much earlier. They can then buy a house earlier, they're able to buy a car earlier, and those kinds of larger household, including the house investment, happens earlier in their life, which is actually, you know, if you're interested in sort of justifications for these kinds of public good investments, you could make the argument it's actually good economics.
The YouTube people are very active. And they were interested in knowing, they're asking each other, but they're also interested in knowing what brings our guests here to this conversation this evening. And I can tell you what they've said on the YouTube channel. So one was really interested in seeing the film and hearing what people thought about it. So I'd love to hear maybe a little bit more from our guests. Another one was asking, you know, was saying, I'm really interested in knowing about what resources are available. And then another one said she was really interested in poverty in the U.S. and how it's affecting families and children. Do we have any other takers?
Now, I've worked in different fields in social service work, so this is interesting to me, and I've worked with low-income families through the Head Start program, and I agree with a lot of things being said, and it's a hard job. It's hard to have a solution because each family is different, and okay, we got this family set up, it won't work with this family, so, yeah.
Yeah, that's useful.
It's-
Great.
So I've heard about it, and I thought, this sounds interesting, I'm just gonna go, you know, so.
Had you seen the film before?
No,
So it resonated along the same lines?
Yeah, I've working with the low-income families, I've seen families like that. I've also seen families where the kids, maybe grandma grew up in the housing, mom grew up in the housing, here's the kids, that's their community. Everybody's all the same, and everybody's on food stamps. everybody's in a single parent. It's just like they're surprised when they see other communities. I saw that a lot too.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
So they're not striving to get ahead because nobody does. This is just the way it is, and I saw that a lot. So
Was anyone struck by the, and maybe I'm just asking for other people's opinion on some of the segues? What we saw was Interstate 80, okay, very close, through the Quad Cities, obviously through LaSalle. So the Interstate 80 crest, if you will, was used as a segue, and then we saw several instances where there was a railway, including one of our young ladies who was doing cartwheels on the railway. The train came through. So just wondering what the producers were thinking by having, was that life passing them by or something, or what was that a metaphor? Just thinking about the aesthetic of the production.
I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. I mean,
That they're stuck in place maybe, and everything else is moving by. I mean, I just
Yeah.
thought it was.
it also connects these towns, I guess, too, because
Right.
they're all different. I mean, it's one region, but they're very different towns and very different families who may not even have a connection with each other.
Right.
Yet the story is.
They're all
kinda-
connected by what they're living.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I just thought it was something to show this as a cross-country type of thing, like
Gotcha.
Interstate 80
Right.
East, you keep
Midwest.
going.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you keep going, yeah, so I just thought it was a way.
Although
of-
interesting, one of the I-80 signs was actually I-80 California, which
Yes.
I thought, well, that's interesting. Which is,
Stockville.
yeah, which is also to say national, right? It's a national issue. So what we're seeing here in the Midwest, in the middle of the cornfields, and the Rust Belt, which was also interesting, that Stockton on their community sign or seal, they had corn stalks and smokestacks, which is to suggest that both rural and urban manufacturing and farming, these are sort of transcendent issues. They may manifest maybe a little differently, rural versus urban, but they are all part of a set of macro scale issues, whether it's deindustrialization or global competitiveness, whatever that might be. It's sort of these are all transcendent issues, which for me goes back to the point that we can ask people to work as hard as they can, but we're asking them to sort of fight these transcendent issues, and maybe they could use a little help, would be my thought.
I think to that point, again, I think about the community as large. The work we're doing is we're encountering people in their most desperate situation, right? And our first and foremost thing is to try and give them hope. I think about what you said about the Head Start program, and that is such a critical program to help youth get a head start in their education, right? So much of the work that we're doing is trying to plant a seed of hope for someone. And we saw the kids still had some of that, but did you notice the parents? The parents look so tired, right?
Mm-hmm.
The parents look really haggard, right? And even 5 years later, right, it's kind of, if you think about your own life, if you've ever been in a struggle. So the first point, I think, is how do we instill hope in someone? And I know that's what we try and do in the work that we're doing. Secondly, how do we bring a community together so that they understand what is happening in their own community before it gets to that point you're talking about, which is the decline, right? As you lose industry, as people move out, as things change, as people stop going on to higher education, what is left in these communities? So it's kind of how do we kind of rally each other to kind of work to stop that decline? And that starts with the seed of hope too, right?
It really occurs to me, I'm thinking about the programs that we've talked about that people rely on, like Head Start and Medicare, Medicaid, and these things. I mean, there was a moment in our history when those things happened, and it was the war on poverty in the 1960s.
Right.
Yeah.
And some of the other things we talked about, school lunches was like an early 20th century progressive policy, Social Security, all the different kinds of things that people rely on. So there's the social safety net that our federal government could be providing for us that might lift some boats. But then I'm hearing like community is really a big part of it too. It's not that we can just say policy is going to answer all of our needs, because it can only do so much. We also need to kind of be aware of each other and care for each other at the same time.
I teach a course on community and economic development, and I do talk about the phrase "a rising tide lifts all ships," and that's a powerful metaphor. You can just sure, of course, a boat's out there, they all go up and down, but as the book suggests here, and also in the video, we saw that different families in different places are affected differently by national policy, and so it does really, I think, matter what state you're in, what community you're in. That would determine in part just how well households and families are treated, and I think some people are far better off than others, and one can even look at, thinking about life expectancies. There's a huge variation within our state and even across the country, and so for me it kind of raises questions. Yes, we have these federal policies and intended to help everyone the same, but that's not what happens, is it?
No, I mean, that's how community action agencies came to be, was because of the war on poverty. That's how we were founded. And how many years ago, and we're still here. So to your point, policy is not the only answer to that. And sometimes the very systems that are put in place to help are actually the very systems that get people trapped in their circumstance, right? So I think it takes that grassroots effort to make that difference in our communities. I see that here in LaSalle County. We have homeless shelter, 2 homeless shelters in LaSalle County. Homelessness is an issue here, and that community has realized that, and the community is coming together to raise money to, one of the shelters has outgrown its usefulness, and so the community is coming together to raise funds, and while they're working on grants and other things, to be able to tear down or whatever they're going to decide to do to make that a more useful space to address the homelessness that this community knows it has. So that wasn't any federal money that came in and said, oh, we're going to help you with this. It was those citizens who said, wait a minute, we care enough about this particular issue to try and change that. And so it takes all walks of life in a community to kind of make that happen. And it's going to be pretty amazing once that is completed, to be better able to address the needs of the homeless in the LaSalle County area. And that's just one example of what a group of people have done. I think about your story about food deserts and communities there's a community not far from here, it's not in LaSalle County, but they undertook something a grocery store was going out of business, and that community.
Is that Sheffield?
In Sheffield, that community came together.
We work with Sheffield.
That's an amazing story. Ameren gave them a huge grant too. But that is a story that's nearby where that community.
It was community funding almost exclusively,
almost exclusively. Now was there anything else out there that would have done that? But that was that community saying we care enough about each other to make sure that we don't have it. And that store is amazing. They've done some really creative things with that store. So that's, I think, what we hope to bring together is people helping each other to do that.
Well, I want to thank both of you so much for sharing your wisdom and your experience with this group online and in this room. I thought I would actually end a little bit with a quotation and also with some announcements about our future programs, of course, because that's what we do. The quotation is actually from James Truslow Adams, who is the person who wrote a book called The Epic of America in 1931. And it's supposedly the origin of the term the American dream. So the epilogue of his book is a whole, essay on the American dream. And I think it's really interesting because as we were talking about it in this room and saying what we think the American dream is today, it's kind of different from what he was saying. So I thought I'd read this. The American dream that has lured tens of millions of all nations to our shores in the past century has not been a dream of merely material plenty, though that has doubtless counted heavily. It has been much more than that. It has been a dream of being able to grow to fullest development as man and woman, unhampered by the barriers which had slowly been erected in older civilizations, unrepressed by social orders which had developed for the benefit of classes rather than for the simple human being of any and every class. And that dream has been realized more fully in actual life here than anywhere else. So I read that because the idea of opportunity and equality and the opportunity for all of us to live to our fullest potential is maybe the American dream versus all of the other things we talk about, property ownership, et cetera, cards.
And I think the children in that video in the update captured what you just said, right?
Yeah.
They talked about you can't take my dreams. I still have dreams, right?
Yeah.
Still thinking about that opportunity.
And so how do we work together
So
to
how do we work
preserve
together?
that? Right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For those of you who are following the big read, next month is when we start reading Infinite Country by Patricia Engel. We still have one more program that's really connected to Heartland, and it's a program next month at the Illinois State Museum in Springfield called Saving Illinois Farms Through Sustainability and Equity. So we're going to be talking to a couple of folks who are farmers, but also folks who are advocating on behalf of farmers. So Alexandra Sosa, who is the Executive Director of Farm Worker and Landscaper Advocacy Project, Fred Carter, who's a co-founder and Executive Director of the Black Oak Center, which is near Kankakee, and another mystery person who I'll tell you about another time. And then in March 23rd in Princeton, which is very close to here, I'm excited about this. It's a program called Everyone Has a Story. It's a performance and a storytelling workshop with Nestor Gomez. He is a many-time winner of the Moth, telling his own personal story. He was once undocumented, an undocumented immigrant. Today he is a citizen of the United States, and he tells some really terrific stories about his life and experience. And then in April, we're going to have 2 writing workshops that are part of the Big Read as well. One will be in Rock Island at the Midwest Writing Center, and another one will be in Chicago, and that one will be in Spanish. So if you're interested in any of those things, and if you want to join a book group, please do. We would love to see you. Thanks so much to both of you.
Thank you.
And onward.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.